There we go. Okay, I'll start over. Chair Nolan Clouda.
Here.
Vice Chair Alex Monty.
Here.
Mr. Brian Flynn.
Here.
Mr. Robert Helser.
Here.
Miss Lindsay Hobson.
Here.
Mr. Mark Buchan.
Here.
Miss Carla McConnell.
I'm here.
Mr. Jared Riedel. And Miss Carmel Litchfield.
Was it recording when I called the meeting to order?
It was recording, but not the voice.
Okay. Oh. Do I need?
This not,
Okay. Well then, let me retroactively, just to make sure, call the meeting to order again, just so we're on the record with it straight. If everyone has the, or
I just, this is Matthew Harvey. I didn't hear my name called. It was clipping in and out just a little bit, but just to be marked as present.
we'll let it slide this once.
Thank you, Nolan.
So everyone has the agenda. If everyone approves this agenda, we can, I would hear a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the agenda.
Second. Thank you. Then on to our informational reports. For chair's report, just I guess just a couple of comments. I see we have it on the agenda probably to discuss for our June meeting to hold elections for chair and vice chair. I've been chair on this term for about a year, I think since sometime last spring. And it's been a great privilege to be chair here. And this is my second tour of duty as chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. But I'm also happy to step down and allow someone else to step into the reins. I don't need to FDR the Budget Advisory Commission. So in any case, it'd be a good thing. I want to make sure if we go into if we do elections in our June meeting or actually it would be did we say May or June meeting? Sorry, I can't remember here. I talked about that.
I have it to discuss for the next
Okay.
meeting, but I don't think we decided we were going to do
Okay.
voting.
Sure. Well, it could be for May or June, but it's a good idea for people to think about whether you're interested in being chair. Nobody needs to, say it now, but anyone who's interested in being chair, vice chair, and if there's someone that would nominate you to be chair. So put some thought into that. And yeah, any comments? Yeah, Al?
I was a chair before for a number of years and served as the vice chair now. And I will not be nominated for the chairman's job, but I will fill the vice president's job if nobody else wants it.
Al kind of did FDR, the Budget Advisory Commission. So no, Al did a great job. Al was actually the chair when I first joined, and so things full circle. Yeah, then were you going to say something, Lindsay? Did you have a comment? Oh, okay, so I saw your hand go up. So in any case, yeah, just planting the seed for folks to think about if anyone wants to step forward into that leadership role. And I'm happy to help make the transition happen for whoever wants to do that. We can move on, I think, to our assembly report, and it looks like Assembly Member Zalatel is on the line. So go ahead and take it.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you. So we are back into, the secondary budget season. On Tuesday night, we received the first quarter budget documents. Co-chair Brawley and I have started to go through them just as an initial read. And have had some great conversations with the OMB director and are looking forward to their presentation on Friday. A couple of things of note, the current budget revisions propose to put a 0.05 mil in place, and that is around the Building Service Safety Area Fund. As we know, that's been running at a deficit for a number of years. That small mil amount will not fill it, but the idea is to kind of staunch the bleeding. In fact, it'll still bleed a little bit, but the idea is to slow it down and use the tool again. I believe it'll be about a $1.5 million amount. We worked collaboratively with the administration on that idea. So we'll see how the assembly takes that. It's a policy choice at that point. And, but that has been a concern for a number of years, that fund continues to grow with the debt, and there really hasn't been a mechanism put back in place to address that debt. Similarly, there is, I think, another big change, and something we took action Tuesday night to introduce tax anticipation notes for public hearing on the 23rd. The proposed budget documents presume no issuance of tax anticipation notes. Co-Chair Brawley and I's thinking on getting it introduced for public hearing is it can be a tool in the toolbox that isn't necessarily used, right? If we need them, we have them, they can be issued. But if they aren't needed and aren't issued, at least we authorized it, right? We're not back into a 2-meeting delay. Right now, according to the CFO, our cash liquidity is good. We may not need them. But what it does mean is a reduction in revenue of approximately $4 million that we would typically get from the sale of those, which is accounted for in other ways, through the budget documents. And I'm sure the O&B director can provide you a lot more detail on that. If they were to be sold, then we would be having a slightly different conversation. We have sent out as well the first quarter budget amendment form to all assembly members. As co-chairs, we are cautioning that there isn't likely a lot of room for new expenditures. It's more around if you want to make a shift in current spending. And we hope to, after we hear on Friday, kind of set that expectation with membership going into the second meeting. So a week from Friday before first quarter, kind of what we believe the ballpark of any additional funding might be and where those policy choices lie. So we're pretty deep into this. We did set a special meeting for the 30th of April. The intention there is to do the public hearing on the first quarter budget revisions on the 23rd, but to give us a little bit more space and actually take action on the 30th. Hopefully, we continue to try to remain optimistic about the audited financials and any additional information we might get in. So we gave ourselves a little bit more space. I'm not sure if the public hearing on the 23rd will close or if it will be the will of the body to continue the public hearing to the 30th, so that there's really a second opportunity since these only became public. Actually, the first time the public will have easy access to them is Friday through the work session because they were laid on the table. So we kind of want to mitigate that delay. With that, I'm happy to take any questions, but wanted to give you the update on where we're at with this kind of really busy month around the budget.
Yeah, I have a question, Meg. That you mentioned on the tax anticipation notes that there's revenue associated with those. I didn't. How does that work? What does that mean exactly?
Oh, well, so there's a budget line, and I will point you to where you would be able to see it. So it's in AR 2024-104. If you go to the back in the spreadsheet, there is line 11 on the first page of that spreadsheet. It says TAN's investment earnings, and it shows a $4.462 $1 million deficit, right? So when those are issued, those investments usually make earnings. And so if we don't issue them, we lose out on that earning potential. The full mechanics of that, I would ask you to direct to OMB or Treasury, please.
So what happens is our cash flows have a big dip right before property taxes are collected. And in most years, even when you don't need the cash, we elect to issue tax anticipation notes. So now you've got this $150 million that comes in, and two things happen. You pay interest expense on the $158 million, but you invest it, and that's the revenue you were asking about.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a brilliant scheme.
Well, Sometimes.
Because I was thinking of it as a form of debt that would cost the city some.
It's a little bit like arbitrage, right? It works sometimes, but not every year.
Could I interject?
Yes, I'd like your
Yeah.
opinion.
The arbitrage that Sharon's talking about is the fact that these are tax exempt notes because they're issued by a municipality gives you a very advantageous interest rate level. And so you turn around and put that into a money market and you make the spread. So there's your 4 million. But the key is by law, you can't hold that arbitrage for more than a year. So as long as we spend all the funds and cease the arbitrage within a 365-day period, you're allowed to do that.
It's like my new favorite thing about being finance. That's awesome. Question, Al?
I would hope that this year you take a look at our roads and streets. I know we take in over about $10–11 million in gas tax. And we should be applying that directly to roads, as there is a lot of potholes. A couple of schools on East 64th Avenue. There's a school over there, and there's a German school on that same street. That's like a slough. It's like a slough. It's terrible. And I would say that that's in your district, so perhaps you may want to take a drive on by.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for elevating that. Yes, I'm aware of it. It unfortunately hasn't been a CIP priority for that particular community council. But Felix and I are aware, and the project is one that's in line among many in the municipality. We have much more road and frankly, sewer infrastructure needs that far outstrip what we can pay for.
Other questions? Assembly budgets. Thank you very much for the update.
All right, thanks. I have to hop off, but have a great meeting.
Then let's move on to Anchorage School District, and I think we've got Kelly Lessons as well as Katie Barringer.
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly. I'm assuming that Katie may be in the room with you. I can't see her on my limited screen, but maybe she's online. I can't quite tell. I will go first and try to catch you all up to the last month or so and let Katie fill in the details. At a high level, in March, the Anchorage Assembly approved the ASD's FY25 budget. So for the 24-25 school year, this budget included that board amendment to preserve funding to maintain Ignite, which provides gifted services to elementary students across the municipality, immersion, pupil-teacher ratios, and to prevent an increase to class sizes for grades 4 through 12. Those investments in classrooms and classroom teachers, however, are contingent upon an increase in funding from the state of Alaska. And I know many board members are following along with what's happening in Juneau, and nobody really knows how things will sort out down there. So keep posted on that. We had a meeting on the 27th of March, and a couple of things. We received an update on the Academies of Anchorage initiative. The website for that is www.asdk12.org/CCL. That stands for College Career Life. So CAT L. So members of the public can sort of keep abreast of what's happening with that initiative for our high schools. There, I expect to hear another major public update around May 20th. And I'll just say that there has been time noted in our last 2 work sessions to sort of finish a conversation about the academies, but we've been running out of time. So I think this is just going to be an ongoing conversation the board has during our publicly noticed work sessions for at least the foreseeable future. We also, at that 27th of March meeting, approved a resolution that will provide the district an avenue to reemploy retired teachers in an effort to fill open vacancies. On March 29th, the board and assembly had a quarterly joint meeting. Our CFO, Andy Ratliff, provided the board and assembly a brief overview of the FY25 budget. And I think one of the things that he flagged for, where did it go? For the assembly's attention was just the cost shift that has happened over the past 7 or 8 years. Anchorage taxpayers, as funding from the state has stayed flat, essentially have shouldered a greater proportion of the funds coming to the district than the state. It's like a $17 million a year cost shift at this point. So maybe Katie can dig into those details a little bit more, but I think that was an important point that he brought up again. We also discussed the concept of potentially having the municipality pay for sports and activities. This is something that costs the district about $5 million a year. Assembly members did note that fitting this under the tax cap could be difficult, that they requested a letter from the district that also points to models to investigate. And this concept really came out of my conversations with board members from around the state. Juneau pays for their sports and activities. Ketchikan pays for their pools. Fairbanks pays for ice time for hockey teams. So it's my understanding that the assembly has taken ASD's letter to their CFO and assembly council for review. But if that cost shift did take place, that would allow the district to align, $5 million more to instruction, to classrooms, while still supporting drama, music, sports. So that's an interesting possible subject of future conversation. We had a meeting on Tuesday this week that included an interesting update from our English language learner department. And there's a lot of great things going on there. When I asked them questions, I asked about funding. They consistently have served about 15 to 17% of ASD students over the past decade. But when I've looked at their funding since 2015, it's pretty flat. So we know that due to the effects of inflation, they've had a major decline in their purchasing power. And when I asked about this, have you made cuts? Have you made efficiencies? Yes, they have fewer resources to help our English language learners than they used to. Their staff are spread more thinly. So I think that's a great sort of focused example of what happens when we have flat funding in education. Our next meeting will be the 23rd of this month. I don't have the agenda in front of me yet. And in the meantime, just 2 other things. One, Proposition 1, the ASD bond appears to be passing, though of course it hasn't been certified yet. And number 2, I think community members can expect to hear about a relaunch of the district's right sizing plan later this week. I expect to hear to see that a survey is going out. The administration spoke about wanting to better understand community support for a school consolidation plan and to understand the community non-negotiables. So I'm going to pause right there.
Thank you.
Okay, I will fill in a little bit of additional information. I would strongly encourage, and I'll send the link out to be distributed. I would really encourage people to look at the presentation that was provided to the joint school board and assembly meeting, because it has some really interesting slides in there that were really related to questions that have come up. One of them related to fund balance. So the district has not made a habit in previous years of balancing the budget with a large use of fund balance, but that's what we've had to do in order to preserve some of those programs. And there is a slide that shows the different components of the district's fund balance and how that works, because a lot of that, those dollars are really not truly available for using for those purposes. As you know, there's a portion that's set aside for bond rating. And technically, because of the way that the state requires us to designate certain parts of that fund balance as reserved versus unreserved, The amounts that are set aside to encumber for balancing the budget and maintaining the bond rating, those are actually technically classified as unreserved fund balance, which is confusing because it's not, that doesn't mean it's available. It really is truly kind of assigned for a purpose and can't be used. So there's also some information related to the historical attrition figures in our budget. ASD does use an attrition factor in assuming that not all of the positions that we have authorized and included in the budget are going to be perfectly staffed. We have vacancies as the muni does, and that creates some room in the budget. However, one of the conversations that's through this budget process is that number is larger than it has been historically in the FY25 budget. And that's something that we need to monitor very, very closely because really the goal to provide good services to staff and students and families is that those positions don't go vacant at the rates that they have been in recent years. There is also a slide in here that kind of demonstrates that cost shift that Ms. Lessons addressed. And actually in our FY25 budget, it's the first time in recent history that state revenue has been less than half of our total general fund operating budget, less than half at this point. So that is certainly a concern, and you can see how those numbers have trended up, which is, partially by design, right, as part of the local required contribution. But you can see that the municipality, and as other municipalities have across the state, have backfilled that flat funding or the reduction in resources from the state that aligns with how that money is provided. So we're also watching very closely what's happening in the legislature. HB 392 is working its way through a process. The operating budget has had a few amendments. Some have failed, some have passed. And so we're very closely monitoring that to try to figure out how we're going to approach essentially a revision of our budget that has been already put through the process, but that aligns with the actual revenues that we expect to receive. There's two other issues at a state level that we're tracking that have an impact on the district financially and how we're looking at budgets, especially for future years. One of them, I'm sure some of you have seen the articles related to the federal government coming and essentially telling the state that they're out of compliance with the maintenance of equity requirement that was attached to the America Rescue Plan funds to school districts. So the ESSER funds, which is the COVID relief funds that the district received. There was a requirement that essentially that state revenues would not be reduced to districts with a high proportion of low income students and schools. But there was, and I'm sure you guys remember that period of time, there was all of that federal money and programming being pushed out, and then the rulemaking came after. And it happened very quickly, and there was a delay. And so at the point that the state and districts accepted those funds, those ESSER funds, some of those rules hadn't been established in terms of how maintenance of equity would be evaluated at the state level. They did later put in a provision that local education agencies could request a waiver so that at a local level, we didn't have to prove maintenance of equity just because of all the comings and goings of funds and students and the instability during that period of time. But they did not provide a waiver of the state's maintenance of equity. That's why you see the letters that say, hey, Alaska, you actually owe these districts this amount of money if you want to become in compliance with this rule. Of course, the state is appealing that, and for what are probably valid reasons, because we use the formula and the formula is designed to be equalized, and some of the reductions were related to a hold harmless provision. And so that is in process, but what that means essentially for Anchorage is about 16.6 million. So if the state at some point accepted or the federal government wanted to essentially not provide any other ways of resolving this issue, then that's the number that's been attached to what Anchorage School District is essentially owed to become in compliance with maintenance of equity. So we're watching that very closely. Just to kind of dispel some of the misinformation or misunderstanding that's been floating around. The maintenance of equity is associated with not how COVID funds themselves were not correctly or improperly spent. It's really truly related to the amount of state funding that was provided during that time and whether or not that was equitable according to the formula the federal government is using, which also has changed in this whole process of rulemaking. So we'll be watching that. And one of the other things that is relevant to the relationship between what the muni is potentially funding to the district outside of the cap, what are those things that really qualify outside of a local contribution? We have received confirmation that DEED is going to be going through a process of requesting a code change. There is an administrative code that defines local contributions, in-kind contributions from the municipality that qualify against the cap. And so that could change what essentially the municipality is allowed to provide to the district without receiving a dollar for dollar reduction in our state foundation funding. So we're going to be watching that very closely. That could impact the contributions that are made to the transportation fund. That could potentially, depending on what definitions they decide to put forward in that code, could impact the request for student activities. It just really kind of is all depending on how that's defined and outlined in that code. However, we did receive word that they are likely not going to be requesting a change to the definition of in-kind contributions from the municipality. So that comes into play. We have to report and factor in-kind contributions when they're against utilities, property insurance, operations and maintenance costs. And I think there's one other thing that I'm not recalling in the moment. But it excludes lots of other things potentially. So a gift of the use of sports facilities, for example, as they do in Ketchikan with the local borough pool. So we will be essentially watching what's happening there. That will likely, if they're going to successfully change that code, that would take place and impact FY26 budget. So that are kind of the major funding things that we're looking at right now, and kind of trying to track how that's going to play out and how that will impact us in 26 and beyond. And then other than that, we're going through the process, as Ms. Lesson mentioned, of beginning that deep dive into, evaluating the district's footprint and what makes sense in terms of right sizing the number of schools and programs and how that all looks. And so that will, I believe, I don't know, Kelly, if public information went out, but I think there's some notice that's supposed to go out to the public this week if it hasn't already.
I haven't seen public or private information. This is just a reflection on the superintendent's remarks during the school board meeting when he shared that a survey would be going out. So I would expect either later today or tomorrow.
That's all I got.
We get a link to that presentation.
Yes, I will send it to, I was going to try to send it to the chat, but I think I'll just send it out to the email list.
Other questions on ASD stuff? Yeah, Al?
At the last meeting, I asked for a breakout. Have you got that done?
I started on it and I did not finish on it. So thank you for reminding me.
Okay.
I can send that forward. And that is also going to be the basis of taking a look at some of the right sizing. So taking a look at those historical trends of movements of students and where we're at capacity wise in the schools. So thank you for reminding me. I apologize, Al.
Al, I wanted, if I could just chime in, there are a couple of really, I can tell you asked about enrollment trends is kind of what I remember. Is that correct?
Yeah, he had asked about a historical look back and breakout by school, which I was able to locate where we have that information, but I didn't make it make it pretty and
Charter
easy,
school.
easy on the eyes.
Yeah, charter school.
With charter schools broken
Right.
out.
Let me talk through a little bit of that, and then maybe Katie can follow up with sources and links. But so this year, ASD's official enrollment was 43,284. That's done in the October count. You know, if you look back a decade, it's down about 10% from the 2014, 2015 school year. This year, charter school enrollment comprises about 6% of ASD students. Let's see, a couple of main sources for demographics include that October count, which is on our demographics report, which is published every year, and it's available on our website. And there's also the 6-year CIP, which includes lots of information on building capacity. So maybe we can forward those links to this body if that would be helpful. But that's a very brief overview.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
And okay, yeah,
One more
go
clarifying
ahead.
question.
We need to move on.
Yeah. So I think I heard correctly that because of the reduction in state of Alaska funding, the cost shift to Anchorage taxpayers is $17 million.
That sounds.
And then what I think I heard, there was a proposal to move $5 million of extracurricular activities funding to the city, or to basically the city.
Yeah, so that was a topic and a request that came up at the school board joint session. So I think that there was Kelly, can you kind of recap where things were at with that one?
Yeah, and I tried to speak to this, but I'll double back. So the request was made verbally at the joint meeting. That was followed by a written request that President Bellamy, Vice President Jacobs, and I signed on to. That letter was sent to the Assembly, I guess, co-chairs, and now I think is in the hands of the Assembly Council. And so they are going to explore whether that is legal, appropriate, doable. So the board at this point is in a waiting game. And really this is, the intent would be that we would better align all available resources with instruction, which I think is made very clear in the Moore decision from about a decade and a half ago, that districts are responsible for aligning dollars with instruction.
But essentially, I guess what I'm getting at is that total, then the total shift would be more like 22 million burden on the people of Anchorage.
Well, the 17 already exists because as Anchorage property values have increased and the state has failed to increase the base student allocation, that has already taken place. And again, there was a slide in that slide deck that was shown to the Assembly.
Okay.
Thanks for the increase of our managed rate contribution. So thank you very much. School district updates, good, a lot of important stuff. I do want to move on to, you have some guests in the room, so I do want to keep things moving along. Sharon, OMB report.
How many minutes do you want to allocate to me?
I don't know, gonna take 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So, an interesting last 2 or 3 days. And we submitted our Q1 budget to the Assembly on Tuesday at 4:28 p.m. and it was due at 4:30 as a laid on the table item. In a perfect world, it would have been submitted as an Assembly addendum item. But we were only able to submit it as a laid on the table item, and there were a whole bunch of reasons why it was laid on the table. And at the Friday Assembly work session, I will share with the Assembly some of the reasons why there was no choice but to have a laid on the table item. I received some pretty harsh criticisms Tuesday night from one of the Assembly members for the laid on the table item. But this Assembly member, I believe, was not aware of some of the factors that went behind the laid on the table items. And had we submitted items to the assembly on the agenda, they would have had to have been replaced by S versions in any case. But nonetheless, this quarter one budget is very much unlike most quarter one budgets, because typically what you do with a quarter one budget is you take the approved budget and you just, you shuffle it a little bit, right? You update your labor, you update your IGCs, you set the mill rates, you look at what bonds passed. You get updated requests from departments and you can't afford them, and you look at vacancy rates, but that's not what we did this time, not at all. We lifted quite a bit of rocks, and some of the rocks had not been lifted for 20 years. So let me give you an example. We have a fund called Workers' Comp and General Liability, and we're self-insured for workers' comp and general liability. And if you manage that program well, every year you set your rates, your premiums to the departments to cover your costs, your claims, right? And your administrative expenses, but we have not done that for 20 years. And so in quarter one, we are proposing an adjustment, the beginning of a correction. It's going to take a long time to correct because we're in the hole by over $10 million. That means there's been 20 years that we haven't been babysitting that problem. And let me give you another example. So we have a fund called Building Safety Fund, and it's a service area that excludes Eagle River and Chugach. And you go and inspect buildings as they're being built, which is interesting because it means Eagle River is not doing that, which is why when we had the recent earthquake, there was a lot more damage to people who lived in Eagle River, if you notice that in the newspaper. But similarly, and that it's a hybrid, because that fund is has been managed for about 20 years, like what we call an internal service fund, where it's supposed to cover some costs. People pay the inspection fees, and it should cover the costs of the people who work in that department. But it hasn't been working very well, so it's been losing money year after year after year. It's been growing this ginormous deficit. So we took step one of a cure, which is when we look at the huge grid of all the mill rates by service area, for the first time in 20 years, you're going to see half a mill rate for that service area, and you haven't seen it in 20 years. So we're starting to solve problems that nobody's looked at in 20 years. And here's another thing that no one has looked at since 2020. In 2020, we sold municipal light and power, but and we paid some very handsome retention payments to the municipal light and power executives. But here's what they didn't do in exchange for those retention payments. They didn't wrap up the sale. So it's sitting on our books all over the place. And we're starting in quarter one to take phase one of the closeout. And so in quarter one budget, you will see that we're proposing some cleanup entries to PERS, because what's been happening is we have been charging general government, meaning the taxpayers, for PERS costs relating to MLMP, and I don't believe that's right. And so we're proposing a correction. And also we discovered that we have made a mistake, and a few years ago, we charged almost $1 million of operating expenses to a capital projects fund called the Alaska Center for Treatment, and that might be familiar to some of you. And it's a very highly restricted fund that was a settlement associated with municipal light and power, and we're proposing a correction to that. And then, of course, we've got some phase two things that will come after quarter one budget relating to MLMP. We've tried really, really hard to work with the assembly on this quarter one budget. And so we tried to avoid using vacancy factor as a balancer, even though it's a perfectly legitimate budgetary tool, but they don't like it, and we've tried to work with them. We tried to work toward employee retention and recruiting, because it's important to them, and it's also important to our mayor. So we're proposing a very tiny increase in expenditures of about $70,000, so that employees who are required to work in this building don't have to pay to park in the parking garage. And that way they're treated the same as municipal employees who work over in Elmore or who work in the health building or who work at the police building. We don't think it's fair that if you have to work here, you have to pay $480 a year out of your own pocket to park in a yucky parking garage. And then we're also proposing a $1,000 retention bonus to the non-represented employees as a halfway mark between what we had proposed to the assembly, that the assembly delayed for a year, and nothing, which is what they would otherwise get. And we also proposed avoiding tapping into the alcohol tax fund to support the needs of the health department, because the assembly doesn't like it when we try to tap into that fund. And there's a school district issue that we are trying to cure, that we're proposing the municipality solve on our backs rather than requesting a refund from the school district for, and we believe the assembly will support that. And then finally, we are avoiding under budgeting for overtime because that the assembly doesn't like that. And we're also trying to support at the same time the mayor's objectives. So the budget comes in $1 million under the cap. And the mayor is also interested in employee retention and recruiting. And the mayor is very, very keenly interested in shoring up the controller division so that we can get those financial statements out more timely. So we took something the assembly did when it amended the 2024 budget. It put $900,000 more in the IT department, and we're sharing that adjustment between two other departments.
Those are all very interesting updates. The stuff that's on the books and the cobwebs you find.
Not your mother's budget.
It's fascinating. And I wish we could devote a little more time to even talking about that.
Yeah.
But we've got two guests here,
Yeah.
so I want to move on.
Okay.
And thanks for waiting, guys. But we
Yeah.
have from Girdwood Board of Supervisors. Mike, you can come on up to this. But yeah, Girdwood Board of Supervisors. You say it is Edgington?
Edgington, yes. Yes.
And then our treasurer, Glenn, and how do you say your last? Cipriano. Okay, very good. So I don't know what kind of format you guys want to have for this discussion, but the idea of what we're talking about the subject of bed tax, potential, changes in the way that those revenues are allocated in connection to short-term rentals and broader housing concerns. And so I don't know how you guys want to divide this up, but subject to generate a lot of interest when you tease it.
Sorry, I have a presentation which probably take 5 minutes to go through, but I can do it faster if necessary, or I can.
That would be excellent. Yeah.
Do you have, you want to pull this up? Or?
Can I say one thing before he starts?
Sure.
The assembly member who spoke said that the 5 laid on the table items are not available on the website. They actually are all posted on OMB's website. So I just wanted to correct that statement.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I actually found them. So.
Yeah.
Are you able to pull this up? Oh, excellent. Thank you. Go through my disclaimers first.
Sure.
So disclaimers and disclosures. I think I'm listed as Governing Board of Supervisors. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, but I am on the Board of Supervisors. I'm one of the 25 elected officials in the municipality. The 20 you all know about. 5 of us in Nico. This uses public information. I haven't seen anything that's internal to the MOA or actually done any FOIA requests or material non-audited. My motivation in full disclosure is Governing has a very high number of short-term rentals because the number of issues with our housing market. Every other community I've spoken to or studied uses typically taxes raised from tax to as part of the mitigation process to address issues around housing. So I'm interested in whether that's an option here. That led me into the wonderful world of room tax and bond financing. To speak briefly, that picture is deliberate. It's a bad pun on dive. It's also an illustration that I'm on the outside looking in, and it illustrates my sort of wide-eyed naivety. I think when I started this process, I'm obviously a much more wizened grey here. Second slide just goes through the disclosures I already mentioned.
Do you want to do full screen? Here, do full screen. You would click this.
Yeah, if you could, I can do it.
There you go.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
One actually moves forward. And I'm not sure what I'm controlling.
You can use the arrows on your, there you go, that's.
Oh, right, okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just the disclosures. I'm going to start with conclusions, do things backwards. I like eating dessert first. So the main things I learned from doing this is obviously we've seen a significant increase in non-hotel motel room taxes, basically short-term rentals. It was about just under 6.5 million last year, about 15% of all the taxes. Historically, non-hotel motel for about 1 or 2%. I thought, like I think many people did, that room tax splits 3 ways: 4% to convention centre, 4% to tourism, and 4% to general fund. It's not practically like that at all. It's very different because bond financing created this very restricted fund for convention centre room tax fund, and that brings in a whole bunch of extra limitations to how money is brought in, how money can be spent. However, a lot of those restrictions appear to have gone away at the end of last year. There's an escape clause, which I'll talk more about. And last thing is the tourism dedications, that 4% dedicated tourism. When I went back and actually found out where that came from, it came from a proposition in 1979. It appears to be limited to hotel and motel funding. So they're like kind of 4 main things. So there are already several ways in which I think there's flexibility. So quick background: who pays room tax? It's 12%, normally 4%, 3 different components. It used to be 5% when the Great Revolution existed. It was increased to 8% in 1979, along with the other changes I mentioned earlier. And then 4% was added to downtown convention centre in 2006. It was a bond, a proposition in 2005. There are several exemptions. Long-term rentals don't pay. A lot of government paid rooms don't pay taxes. Hostels don't. So if you're renting a pillow versus a room, and also things where rental is incidental for main purpose, so hospitals, colleges, etc. The non-hotel motel part that used to be bed and breakfast exclusively, bed and breakfast had to pretty much exclusively had to register independently. As short-term rentals increased, in 2016, municipalities started collecting money directly from one of the short-term rental platforms. That was extended to all of them in 2019. So if you look at the other numbers here, this again is from public data. This is the growth in room tax, and as you can see, it definitely grew. The red component top is the non-hotel motel. The yellow is the hotel motel. There are some interesting things on the graph. Say, obviously, we see the step change from 8% to 12% in 2006. You see a drop in 2009 following the 2008 financial crisis. You see the little red bit at the top becoming quite a big red bit, partly because of growth in short-term rentals, and also partly, I think, it jumps when money is collected from the platforms themselves. We obviously see the dipping curve as well. If you model this data in terms of sort of compounded growth, the growth in revenue from the hotel sector was about 3.5% from 2006 to 2015, jumped to 6.8%. From 2016 to 2023, not 2020. Basically, recently that's been running obviously at a higher level. Short-term rentals, what used to be bed and breakfast, was increasing by about 5%. What is now short-term rentals increasing by about 34% again. So it's massively increasing. And the consequence of that is a proportion of non-hotel tax is now 15%. It was historically about 2%.
That's supposed to be 2016 to 2020.
That was meant to be 2016, sorry, my bad. I make one deliberate mistake in every. That might be it. Sure. That's right. So a little bit about this 4%, 4%. Normally, that's the way it's split. That's what code says. But really, that's not the case. And the restrictions come from the 2005 proposition to add the 4% of the convention centre and the 1979 proposition and a charter change. Sorry, I got that wrong. The charter change is for the convention centre, section C. Okay. In reality, what actually happens is when the bonds were issued to the convention centre, there was a concern that that 4% would not be enough to pay future bond payments. They ramp up over time as bonds do. The highest bond payments around 7 million a year towards the end of the bond issue. I think the penultimate year of the bond issue. And at the time, if you remember the last graph, something around I think around 18 million. So maybe 6 million, that 4% would represent 6 million. So there was concern that would be enough. So there was some extra conditions and requirements added to make payments from the tourism component initially into this thing called Convention Centre Room Tax Fund, which is very restricted. So these extra payments were about 66.25% tourism room tax, plus an additional $500,000 from the tourism component. And then shortly after the financial crisis, when we saw that dip, another $500,000 was committed from the general. So there are also restrictions on how that can be used, which I've listed there, but I'm not getting details for. So all the gory details of this diagram, which is visible. I'm not going to go into details there, but that's all the information. Quite a bit of detail about it. So in effect, what this means is if we look at last year, instead of there being 4% of convention room tax, it was effectively 7%. 7 was subject to the restrictions that are imposed by the Convention Centre Room Tax Fund. General was just under 4%, and tourism directly got about 1%.
And that tourism directly is going to visit Anchorage?
Yes. Yes. The Convention Centre Room Tax Fund can be spent on tourism, on promotion of tourism, but it's actually relatively limited compared to the original language in both bond and code. In the proposition and the code. So some Visit Anchorage can receive money from the CCRTF once other conditions are met. Everything not spent on defined things within the CCRTF goes into a capital reserve replacement to the convention centres. So if you do underspend, it goes into that. And my understanding is that can't be touched. What is except for obviously the purposes of defined. What is interesting is there is a escape clause in both the bond financing and the use agreement to the conventions, which is the actual legal document that controls this. And it anticipated a future when tax receipts would be very, very high. At more than 175% of the maximum payment, which as I said, is just under 7 million. So 175% of 7 million. If these components exceeded that for 2 years consecutively, then those requirements would go away. So you no longer have those the extra components from room tax going through this restriction. And in fact, those conditions were met in 2022 and 2023, according to the public information. It has to be confirmed by finance. And then there is then a procedure for kind of announcing that. But it was exceeded by quite a long way. So my interpretation of this, and I am not a lawyer, but my interpretation is that those extra restrictions will not exist in 2024. So that releases basically 2 more components. The 1.1 and the 9.7 million listed there, assume flat, assume no growth at all in tax funds, 34%, 7% we've seen historically. That would be subject to far fewer restrictions. Basically,
only a minor code. So that gets us much closer to the full. A couple more things we can jump through.
Real quickly, are the bonds paid or are the bonds paid off now?
No.
They're still, so we still owe good.
That's for at least another decade or so. Okay, yeah, newsroom tax. So the charter was amended to talk about the convention centre. So that is pretty restricted. It requires a charter change. However, the tourism dedication comes from a 1979 proposition, and I've actually found the election ballot and shown that down the bottom corner. And it talks only about motel tax. It's pretty explicit. Now, at the time, they were the only things that were being taxed. But I think one can make an argument that maybe that was voter intent. So we're 35 years later now. I don't think Airbnb was expected, was anticipated in that. Though there is an argument there is a degree of flexibility provided that. So there are various policy proposals one can follow here. One is that under the 2024 onwards, the bit that's dedicated to tourism is much less restricted than it was under the bond requirements. So I think that would arguably allow a much more flexible interpretation of what is promotion of tourism. I would hate to suggest maybe bathrooms downtown, but that's an example of something I think one could make a case for. But that's a political discussion. The thing that I find particularly interesting, again, for me, is that short-term rental room tax. I don't think it's maybe a very strong case to say that is not subject to the tourism restriction at all. So there are various ways we can approach this. We could take effectively the component that comes from short-term rentals. A third of it has to be by charter dedicated to convention centre. But the other 2/3 doesn't. So we could look at it using that sort of simple diagram that I had before. There's kind of three different ways perhaps of looking at this. One is taking that short-term rental and just sending it straight to the general fund, which releases that. One is basically taking it out of the tourism dedication and making it available for something like perhaps related to short-term rentals and their impacts. And the other way is to take it out of both the general contribution and the tourism contribution, and again making it available in a way that's perhaps dedicated to deal with issues around short-term rental. So these again are the numbers if we assume flat. These are the numbers with a low degree of precision, assuming a flat growth next year or so. Right, so I'm just going to go back to my conclusions. So just to reiterate, so definitely on my look from the outside, we definitely, I don't think there's any argument, we've seen a significant increase in room tax overall, particularly for short-term rentals. Up till now, it's not been anything close to a full split. But it does look like that is the way it will be from 2024 onwards. And the last thing is tourism dedication appears to not, or at least one can argue that tourism dedication does not apply to money coming in short-term rentals or long-term rentals. So, there was some questions.
Yeah, Mr. Ciprian.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. Mike, I think what you're talking about is the bond indenture itself.
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's where the release comes.
Yes.
When certain criteria is made. And so that I believe is a done deal, really. I think I'd spent some time with Ross and we did go through that. So that cash flow projections that you have illustrated here are very doable. I don't even think we need an interpretation. And then secondly, I would agree with you. We are, Anchorage is seeing just record after record for tourism revenue. We, pre-COVID, we were about 31 million. This is all in. And we dipped down to about 13 million in 2020. But this year, we may see 45 million. So the numbers are extraordinary, and we don't see an end in sight. One of the Treasury's duties is to project revenues for the coming year. And when we looked at hotel and motel and even travel revenues, there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. What happens is when you see inflation kick up, hotels and motels pass that through. So you start with a growth of what inflation should be, which in our opinion is going to be about 3% this year. And then you kind of look at the air traffic and you look at the cruise traffic, you make projection, and we see kind of a vibrant industry. And this is, of course, barring some black swan event like something like that. Least to it. There's always that possibility, but we should be in that $45 million area for 24, 25. You can at least add inflation to. So the projections are for a very robust stream of income from travel. One of our problems, and this may be a stumbling block for a short amount of time, is the way we collect revenues from our hotels and motels and Airbnb is we use a third-party vendor called Harris Gardner. And what they do is they set up a portal on the web. And so we have our hotels and motels going into there, and then we ask them for certain information, which is, like what your occupancy, what your revenue is. And then they go ahead and report to us what their taxation will be, and they do that on a quarterly basis. Now, we would have to revise that because if I remember right, you're looking for, we have to be location specific, correct? To identify property.
Yes, this is, sorry, I didn't mention that earlier, but to project this further, they would need to, I think, to do a fair allocation and to address issues of short-term rental. I think it would be useful to have the platforms themselves reports, location, zip code, like level information, and probably account, because the other attempt to regulate the individual short-term rentals was not successful. So this is a way to at least get the data and to understand how the distribution of revenue is coming across the community.
So that's a hurdle, but I believe it's easily overcome, but it would involve the reconfiguration of our portal and then add, whatever additional reporting criteria you'd like to see in that. And I think that would be probably within a 6 months to 9 month time frame we could accomplish that. And the vendor we use does have he's a sole source for the municipality, so there's no hurdle there. But so we would need at least 9 months to start up the kind of reporting you need to look at this.
To start that reporting, would that be, do you need the assembly to pass an ordinance?
I think you would, because the language for the hotel motel taxation is very specific. And we would have to amend, the actual area in the code that specifies what information they are to, give to us on a regular basis. So I believe it would start with that. And then based on what the specifics of what the assembly is requiring for information, we would go to our vendors, get a price on, updating our portal. And again, I look at that 6 to 9 months startup time for them.
But just to add, my understanding is the short-term rental platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, etc., will not provide any information unless there's a legal requirement.
That is,
so there does need to be an ordinance change. Yeah, for an ordinance to change code to require them. They're excited this draft.
There is also proprietary data that you can pay for. I've looked at carefully that give a lot of information about.
Yes, it's I'm a data scientist by data, so it's very difficult to that as well a lot, and it's relying on certain modeling, which I perhaps would be is completely reliable. There's a certain amount of error, right? But we're nowhere near as good as having real numbers coming from the platforms themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then one other question that we had when we discussed this, Mike, was how willing now would the operators of these short-term rentals, how willing would they be to swing this? For instance, if you have platform,
Well, the platforms render a lot of information when they're required to. They have the. So my understanding of other communities is when they're asked for things like location or else on the number of operators, they've made it a code requirement and the data is going to the platform.
But not the strata of the mom and pop shops that if someone has like one or two of their own personal.
So if people are not using platform,
Right.
they would have to report individually. That's down to the requirements. Again, still requirements in code.
Right.
Probably, but those individual operators are probably a pretty small percentage of.
Yeah, and even individual operators, if they're going through the platform's collecting the tax from, if not from the operator, the platform is collecting the tax from the guests.
Right, so it's like a two-tiered thing. We would need registration.
Well, I think for
on platform.
if we're not looking at individual recording, this may be too much. If we're not looking to identify individual properties, we're just looking at what's the generic location. So what's the neighborhood that's available from the platform. And it's the platform which would give information about individual properties without a solution.
Right, and so I'm thinking of the non-platform users, like, I don't know, we'd have to have the registration process, yeah. And then that seems to be a hurdle. And I don't know what the percentage would be, but the majority would be the platform, of course.
Working approximation would be 0%.
Yeah, the platforms have to be a big.
But those are the logistics that we see when we approach this.
Okay, so the idea, so the idea here on the table then, I mean, you laid out a couple of possibilities in your slides, Mike, but I think that like the idea of a mitigation fund for short-term rentals is probably part of what's driving this, right? And which I think probably is something that would have a lot of, I don't know how it would go, but it has a lot of support probably in the community. A lot of people, including myself, are big worrywart about Anchorage's housing. So I can see that. Have you thought about what that fund would look like, where the money would eventually go? What would be the best use of it to solve some of the problems created by short-term rentals?
Yes, but we don't have long enough to tell.
Like,
Very briefly, one of the things we've done in preparation for this is we gave ourselves, and we voted to tax ourselves to provide a service around housing and economic development service, which we did on this community last year. So we actually have a fund for that location, an area to put both land management and funds within the municipal structure to have space for this sort of thing. So we've done some preemptive work. How this would work for other communities, I don't know. There is an argument that the impact of short-term rentals exists, but it's somewhat minor at very low densities. But once you hit, so in single digits, I've seen some papers that suggest 5 to 6%, some lower, some slightly higher. Once you hit that sort of level of density, then start seeing much more significant impacts in both availability and cost of housing, both purchase because it brings in investors rather than homeowners or rather and also the impact on long-term rental. So once you hit 5 or 6%, maybe that's when it becomes a much more significant. So one way of structuring this is so the fund is distributed and focused more on areas of high density. Golan is currently at 20% of my housing units. South Edition is probably sitting in the mid-single digits.
I think a lot of downtown adjacent neighborhoods, very high percent.
But it's 6%-ish.
Right. Yeah. So I want to open up to questions and discussion, including from, and I don't know, we can't see folks online right now, but there might be some questions there too. I don't know who has control of whether we can see our compatriots on that call. In the room, anybody questions or concerns or discussion? Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to see a follow-up, some numbers. What's going to be the cost of outsourcing this and how much, where's the savings, if any, are they going to go? I think it'd be nice to just have a look at some numbers.
They talk about software budgets and to create the type of reporting on the online portal that we have.
Good question sorry, did you want to say more about that? Okay, question from Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
Hey, Mike, thanks for putting all this together, and you did this pretty in-depth. I was kind of struggling a little bit to hear about the location specific and I guess what that entailed. Maybe if you could just explain that just a little bit louder for the microphone, and then also like the actual, like if we were to use money from the mitigation fund, what would the intent of the use of that money be going towards specifically?
I think Glenn could probably answer the first part and I'll answer the second.
The first part was, again,
What needs to be done to get location data?
well, I think specifically, you'd have to start with the assembly. The code would have to be changed to require that data. I don't think that operators would surrender that without some kind of, prompting. And so that would be step number one. And then two, we have to make the mechanism to store and factor some of that data and make it available for our analysis. So it's twofold. First, you have assembly action, and then second, I think you're going to have a software cost to update our current reporting system. And if I wouldn't say it's de minimis, but software portals, we're doing one right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to be converting our rental vehicle tax collection to a mechanized system that uses that portal. And we're about at $250,000 to create that from scratch. So this would be an alteration of an existing portal. So we'd be somewhere a little south of that, say, but we're looking at $200,000.
And to very, very briefly, I will try and keep this brief, answer the second part. There are multiple models in other, again, looking just from a COVID perspective, there are multiple models that are showing some degree of success in other resort outdoor recreation communities across the West. And all of them generally require some sort of funding. So that includes systems that basically have direct grants to encourage conversion from short-term rental to long-term rental, or to convert to long-term rental currently vacant housing. It includes, there's a process around deed restriction, a voluntary deed restriction program, where people who own houses, typically when there's a sale occurring, basically there is an investment public investment, or at least non-profit investment, into a deed restriction to make that housing permanently occupied rather than being a second home or a short-term rental. And then the other thing is just directly constructing housing at a lower cost point, or at least providing mechanisms to support lower cost housing, or just housing which has restrictions, so it's used for occupation for residential use rather than second home or short-term rental use. So they're the three main things. Bed equity is basically the model, the underlying concept from the three.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I heard that one much better, and that makes sense. With regards to, it's not really is no like policy decision related to short-term rentals. It's more so rather like related to the collection and usage of rooms and rentals taxes, and I don't know if a definition of short-term rentals is in code, or if that would need to be updated or anything related to that either. But is that a true statement?
I would say yes, that's a pretty accurate statement. I don't believe there is actually a current definition in the tax code.
I believe
Yes.
there is, but wasn't there some proposed legislation? Sharon, do you remember?
There was
Defined-
proposed legislation
Yeah.
for short-term rental regulation.
Right,
Registration would fail.
okay, but I think that's where the definition was. Okay, this one.
So it's basically rental for less than 30 days.
And if I could ask another one, Airbnb already collects and remits short-term rentals tax. Would this first off, is that true? And then second off, would the software upgrade be focused on like independent operators? If I run a bed and breakfast that just has a small little, GoDaddy.com website or something like that.
Right, Airbnb does, and then what we have to do is come up with a system for the non-platformed properties.
Okay.
And so it's twofold. First, you have to legislate, to require them to register. And then that opens up, a lot of other questions, what's your thresholds for registration, things like that. And then the second part would be, how do they connect to Treasury? Will we just, once they're registered, will we put them in like we have currently a list of users? Would they simply, join that list? So logistics like that. And my question, how willing are these really small operators to register and get into that whole reporting system? It's not extensive what we get. We do get pretty extensive reports from some of our larger hotels, of course, but do they want to, get involved in that type of reporting and, that kind of thing?
The registering location is something you have to do at the very beginning of the process. You have to say where the proper location is. So again, if we're collecting information at the neighborhood or zip code level, that information is available day one, and it's not likely the building itself is going to be. So it's not an IO, it's not no coding requirement. It's one more attribute which ties to the individual registration.
Like with our hotels and motels, we ask them for, how many rental units they have and what specific strat,
Yes.
premium, whatever. And so, what's going to be our criteria for the non-platform users? So are we going to ask for square feet available or something like that? Will they have to update that? All those issues anyway.
So I think, I think this is a super interesting thing, and this could be, and I think, depending on what the will of this group is, Budget Advisory Commission, this could be something that we could, workshop a bit, discuss a bit, and perhaps make a recommendation to the assembly about, what action we think might be best. So I don't know if I'll open it up for discussion. Did you guys, is that something that this group is interested in? I think it might be a good, use of our time and bandwidth as the Budget Advisory Commission.
I think it's kind of like right up the bandwidth of our purpose and duties as a Budget Advisory Commission. I'm happy to maybe just schedule a meeting with Mike or volunteer for a working meeting or something if we want to workshop. Maybe Mike, you and I could meet and then we could bring kind of some more information to a working meeting or next meeting or something. In my mind, though, our recommendations as Budget Advisory Commission would probably be that the Assembly would need to adopt a definition, not really be more specific about what a definition might be, and then maybe offer a range of policy alternatives with pros and cons or something like that. But that would be for future discussion.
Yeah, well, the shape of what we would provide the Assembly, I think is certainly something we can offer. But I think there is, there is some precedent for BAC workshopping something that goes to the Assembly. And I think Al led the charge a few years back with, what was it, the sprinkler exemption, right, for commercial properties, right? That, BAC did a bunch of the heavy lifting on and was able to pass an ordinance for. I don't know. So other folks, BAC, something we want to dig into and spend a few seconds on, or
Yeah.
well, then Al.
How are we coming on profit and loss statements, for the assembly?
You mean the ACFR? Yeah, so it's also got balance sheets and lots of other fun stuff. So it's not going to be issued for a while. Solid waste, no, let me take that back. The board was finalized on Monday. Solid waste is next. There's a lot of work left to do on grants. And then I think the ACFR expectation is the first week of May.
Oh, good. So that we can get copies of that quarterly.
No, it's not a quarterly thing, it's an annual thing. And that's, of course, 2022, talking about, not 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we want to, so our next meeting is May 9th. Do we want to take up the bed tax issue again at our May 9th meeting?
Probably, I think perhaps an update and start to work in that direction. Yeah, I think it'd be nice.
Okay, I think we should, I think we should plan that for our, we also do elections, I think, then, or May or June. whichever,
Yeah,
but,
I think we should add it to the agenda for next meeting.
yeah, I think we should do that. And then, maybe we
And-
should, yeah. Yeah, Carla, go ahead.
Sorry, no, did we get a copy of that presentation with the presentation we just saw, or is it coming out?
I don't believe we did, but I was gonna ask for that too, if we could get that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think
Accept.
next meeting is good too, and that'll give us a chance to, have that presentation in front of us before that meeting and
Yeah,
relook at that.
good.
And you make sure my email address is shared as well, along with that, just in case of questions.
Yes, and it is posted on the BAC website already.
Yeah, I just sent the link to the BAC website where it has the presentation uploaded.
Very good. Good, thank you. Then, oh, sorry, someone else gonna say. Okay, well then, yeah, I think super interesting topic, and I really appreciate both of you coming in and talking about this and the preparation that you're doing. It's nice, so thank you very much. And I would like to follow up with you as well. So with that, I think we can wrap up our meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Both Carla and Lindsay. All right, then we can adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah.